The moment the back door opened, it was already over for the youngest one. An older sibling had cleared the obvious spots before the screen had finished swinging shut, and a 5-year-old in patent leather shoes stood blinking at a yard that had already been picked cleaner than it looked. Someone was crying within the first 3 minutes. Someone else was counting their basket and making no effort to hide the count. A parent called out that the rules had been explained, and everybody knew the rules meant nothing the instant the starting signal sounded. The 1970s egg hunt ran on 3 things at once, and the gap between what adults intended and what children delivered was exactly what made it unforgettable. The first was the egg itself. A real hard-boiled egg died the night before, which introduced every possible complication that a perishable, breakable, carefully counted object could introduce into a competitive outdoor game. The second was the family arithmetic. Siblings of different ages and speeds, cousins with no loyalty to each other, and neighbors whose children arrived with hunting strategies that had clearly been discussed at breakfast. The third was the hidden count problem, meaning the number of eggs placed was almost never the number recovered, and that gap became the source of every story that anyone still tells about Easter in the 1970s. Across neighborhoods, church grounds, and backyards from one end of the country to the other, this ritual played itself out in roughly the same sequence every April. The details shifted by region and family size, but the structure did not. The night before dying session, the morning hiding, the sprint at the signal, the argument that followed the sprint, and then the slow reckoning that came 2 weeks later when the smell announced what the count had missed. Plastic eggs were beginning to appear by mid-decade, but in the early 1970s the hunt still meant real eggs in real grass, with all the consequences that implied. You can walk back into it one step at a time. Saturday night at the dye cups, Sunday morning in the yard, the starting line that was never a real line, the argument over the basket count, the consolation egg, and the one that stayed hidden until the smell found it. This story is built from period photos, common memories, and the record of what the hunt actually was before it became what it is now. Saturday night was where the complications began. The PAAS kit sat open on the kitchen table with its vinegar cup staining the newspaper underneath, and each egg that came out of the dye bath was placed on a paper towel and assigned, in the minds of its creator, a personal identity. A child who had spent 40 minutes getting the color exactly right on one particular egg felt a specific ownership of that egg that no adult rule about communal hunting could fully extinguish. The count was taken seriously. A parent wrote a number on a paper scrap and stuck it under the sugar bowl. In some houses, the number was also spoken aloud more than once, as though repetition would prevent the problem that was already built into the plan. Hiding happened early Sunday morning while children were kept inside by a combination of instructions and the understanding that the kitchen door was being watched. The hider's job was to make the search last at least 10 minutes without losing any eggs permanently. Both goals required judgment, and judgment under time pressure in a yard that had been covered with new grass and the old shrubbery was unreliable. A father who tucked one blue egg into the hollow of a fence post and then forgot which post was not inventing chaos. He was simply operating without the written map that no one had ever thought to make because the hunt had never needed one before. The starting signal was a spoken word, or a hand wave, or simply the moment when the adult who had been blocking the door stepped aside. What followed was not a hunt in any organized sense. A 7-year-old who had been calculating angles since breakfast covered ground in the first 90 seconds that a 5-year-old could not match in 10 minutes. The eggs in plain sight on low branches and fence rails were gone before the youngest participants had oriented themselves. Age segregation, which church-organized hunts had figured out by necessity, did not exist in most backyard versions. A family that sent 4 children of different ages into the same yard without dividing the space had built the argument into the starting conditions. If you enjoy these walks back through everyday American life, this channel covers more decades, more places, and more of the rituals that shaped how people actually lived. The basket comparison happened before the hunt was officially over. A child with 12 eggs and a child with 4 eggs were both aware of the gap, and the parent who suggested that the total was what mattered and that everyone should be satisfied, had not thought through how that argument lands on a specific child standing in specific grass, holding a specific basket. The consolation egg, produced from a parent's jacket pocket, temporarily addressed the count, but did not address the principle. The older sibling, who had found 9 eggs in the first 2 minutes, was not wrong to be fast. The younger child, who had found 3, was not wrong to feel the outcome was unfair. Both things were true simultaneously, and no adult speech at 11 in the morning after church could resolve the tension between them. One morning in the early 1970s stays clear enough to carry the whole argument. The yard is a suburban rectangle with a chain-link fence on 2 sides and a vegetable garden that the hider has declared out of bounds, a rule that will be disputed twice before the hunt is 4 minutes old. 3 children ranging in age from 5 to 11 are lined up at the back steps. The parent who hid the eggs is standing at the corner of the house where he can see most of the yard. He says go. The 11-year-old is already past the rose bush before the word finishes. The 8-year-old heads for the garden fence on a red that it is out of bounds in name only. The 5-year-old bends down to pick up a piece of mulch that turns out not to be an egg and loses 30 seconds to the investigation. By the time the 5-year-old finds the first real egg, the other 2 have established a lead that the rest of the hunt will not close. The out-of-bounds call is made and disputed. The consolation egg appears. Deviled eggs are served at lunch from the surplus, and nobody mentions the count again until 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later was when the count came back. A smell arrived in the yard before any visual evidence did, working its way through the back fence or up from the flower bed with a specificity that ruled out any explanation other than a hidden egg that had never been found. The number on the paper scrap under the sugar bowl said 18. The hunt had recovered 17. 1 egg, placed in a location the hider had considered clever at 6:30 in the morning, had simply never been found. The search that followed the smell was its own event, involving adults and children working together in a way the original hunt had not. Fence posts, drain pipes, the space between the back of the garage and the alley wall, the underside of the wooden porch steps. One family in a Texas suburb, as recorded by a descendant on a community forum, reported that a rotten egg had lodged itself so thoroughly inside a hollow fence post that the father had to use a straightened wire coat hanger to recover it, an operation that took 20 minutes and produced, in the words of the account, a smell that reached the neighbor's yard. By the middle of the decade, plastic fillable eggs had begun appearing in drugstores and dime stores alongside the PAAS kits. The argument for them was practical. A plastic egg could not rot. The inside could hold candy or a coin, which gave the hunt a clear incentive beyond the egg itself. The basket comparison still happened, but a child who found 8 plastic eggs filled with jelly beans was harder to argue with than a child who had found 8 hard-boiled eggs that would all be converted into deviled eggs by Tuesday, regardless of who found them. Church-organized hunts, which handled dozens of children at once and could not afford the logistical chaos of individual family yards scaled to a crowd, moved toward plastic eggs earlier than backyard hunts did. Age sections roped off with twine or marked with lawn flags appeared in church grounds by the mid-decade, and the starting signal became a horn or a handbell rather than a parent stepping aside. The end of the decade found the hunt in transition. Plastic eggs had not replaced real ones entirely, but they had changed the terms of the event. A hunt using plastic eggs could be reused the following year, which shifted the economics. A hunt using real eggs still carried the risk of the count problem, but more families had learned to write down the hiding locations alongside the number, a paper map tucked in a kitchen drawer that functioned as insurance against the smell. The competitive mechanics had not changed. An older sibling still ran faster than a younger one. The yard still had uneven sight lines. The starting signal still produced the same first 30 seconds of territorial sorting. What had changed was the acknowledgement that the old version had a design flaw, and that the flaw had a name: the egg nobody found. The basket gets carried inside and set on the counter. The consolation egg sits at the top, where it was placed to smooth over the count argument. The paper scrap with a number on it goes into the trash with the newspaper from the dye cups. Outside, the yard looks the same as before the hunt except for 2 depressions in the lawn where knees landed during the retrieval of low-hiding eggs. In the kitchen, The surplus hard-boiled eggs go into a bowl of water in the refrigerator because they will become deviled eggs at lunch and egg salad sandwiches by Wednesday. The paper map, if anyone thought to make one, gets unfolded and checked one more time. The count says 18. The basket says 17. Someone will remember that in 2 weeks. What comes back first from your own version of this? The sprint at the back door? The argument over the basket count? The smell that arrived before the visual evidence did? Or the consolation egg that appeared from a jacket pocket and did not quite solve the problem it was meant to solve? More decades, more yards, and more of the small systems that held families together and fell apart at the same time are coming up next.